Yes. Okay, we are now recording. Welcome to Emmanuel's Adult Forum, also known as the Forum, for our first fall 2020 virtual meetings due to the pandemic. We're trying it on the computer via Zoom, and we are trying Thursday evenings to see how that goes. So I'm Marcia. Ken will also be speaking, and we're going to talk about COVID-19 and the influenza and the importance of shots. Okay, so I'm going to start briefly and just talk about similarities and differences between COVID and this flu virus. They're both caused by viruses, different viruses. They both are spread through droplets when people cough, sneeze, or speak, possibly spread through touching objects that have been touched by someone with the germs. That's less certain, but definitely through the air. COVID is more deadly than influenza, but they have a lot in common. Now, let's talk about symptoms. And here is my very high-tech slide.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the symptoms of COVID. This chart also has cold virus symptoms, and they are very similar in some ways. So there's overlap. But we'll go through this briefly. Can you all see it somewhat? I know it's sort of faint. I'll try not to jiggle it too much. Okay, so first we see fever. COVID-19 and flu, it's very common with that, but it can happen with a cold, but it's rare. By the way, allergies also have some overlap with symptoms. Allergies will not produce a fever. Why? Because a fever is the body's attempt to fight off infection, the germs causing it, and there's no germs involved with allergies. Next symptom is a dry cough, although it can also be a moist cough. Anyway, a cough, common with flu and COVID, sometimes with a cold. I almost never cough with a cold, but others are different. Aches, bad with flu and can be bad with COVID, occasionally with colds. All right. Chills, also common in COVID and flu, rare in colds. Fatigue, common in COVID and flu, sometimes with colds. Shortness of breath, again, common with COVID, rare with flu. And loss of smell or taste. This is one of the unusual symptoms of COVID they've discovered. And it can happen with cold or flu, but I would suggest, I bet that's only if your nose is all stuffed up. And of course you can't smell or taste as well. Okay, so those are the most common symptoms. You've seen some similarities there between COVID and flu? Yes. The answer is yes. I'll give you the answers. The test will be super easy. Okay, a few more less common symptoms. And since I can't read it backwards, there we go. Sore throat, more common in colds, but can happen with the flu and COVID. Sneezing, common in colds, etc. Runny nose, common in colds, can happen in the others. Headaches, as you see. Diarrhea and vomiting. This is recently added to the list of COVID. Some people do get it in the GI tract and have vomiting, diarrhea, or nausea. And I don't know anything about this skin rash. I haven't had time to read up on it, but it's rare. So that's what we need to know. So why is it important that there are so many symptoms in common? This is open to the floor.
Because if you have one or the other, you might not know because it's similar.
Exactly. And why is this pertinent to our discussion of the vaccines and why it's so important to get the one vaccine that's available, the flu vaccine? Because if we are not sure what a sick person has, and doctors or nurses need to check by testing, the tests that are used for COVID, the the swab, put it in a test tube in some kind of medium it'll keep safe, and then they'll culture it. All those different pieces are either the same or very similar for testing COVID versus flu. Do you recall how in the worst months in spring, early summer, there wasn't enough of these materials to go around? This could happen again if we have an onslaught of flu. So that's one of the many reasons to get the flu shot. And you're going to hear that statement a lot, get the flu shot. So complications with the flu and COVID are also similar. Not everyone is aware how serious flu can be. But in fact, last year in the United States, 60,000 people died of the flu. You've heard more because it's been such a news item about the complications of the COVID, but they are remarkably similar. Pneumonia is the biggest complication. It can be viral pneumonia, or it can be on top of that bacterial pneumonia. That people can have respiratory distress. They can develop heart problems, injury to the heart due to the infection, sepsis. Their organs can fail, like kidney function can just be zero. I don't know if you heard, but during the bad months of COVID, a lot of people had to go on dialysis because of this, and they were worried that we'd be run out of dialysis. And I imagine in some places we did run out of dialysis machinery and technicians and all of that. Also, other chronic conditions can get worse. Yeah. Now, there's one significant difference. Complication that COVID causes that flu does not, at least not commonly. Does anyone know what that is?
Blood clots.
Very good, Dave. He didn't. I didn't prompt him. Honest. Yeah, I don't know if you're all aware, but there was a person from Emmanuel who ended up in the hospital not too long ago with blood clots in the lungs. A young person. And I thought for sure, oh my gosh, it's COVID. It was not. But they had to test him repeatedly at the hospital to be sure, because that's what they thought too. So there's a lot of similar symptoms, but also similar, really lousy complications. So why is it important to think about the possible complications? Well, another concern is that if COVID continues as it is, waxing and waning in different states, and flu starts in and revs up, we're going to have a lot of people needing the same hospital beds and possibly the same equipment for dialysis, for ICU, for ventilators, and the rest. I guess it's common with the flu to have like 500,000 Americans hospitalized every year. And so if this were a bad flu season, it's just not a pretty picture. So both of these things, the shortage or limited resources for beds in the hospital and other equipment, and the testing supplies, those things are important for us to think about when we're thinking about a flu shot, in that if we want to help the community as a whole, that is very important. And I personally want to help my fellow nurses and doctors to not be dropping like flies. So that's the first part. Um, can a person get the flu and COVID at the same time? We have documentation from China last winter that yes, it has happened. However, not enough was studied to know how bad is it or what happens when a person has both of these infections at the same time. So we won't know much about that until this winter is well underway. But one would think it would make perfect sense that if you have two infections on top of each other, that they would just result in a worse, more serious condition. So we'll know more in a few months, but let's not take chances. Let's get the flu shot so we can at least have a good chance of avoiding that. Now, when I'm harping on the flu shot, of course, I also mean wear a mask, wash your hands frequently, and social distance. Definitely that has to continue, and it's hard to convince some people of that, but that is without question, that has to go on. Now, as far as whether or not the COVID and flu at the same time are a problem, you might say, but aha, the Southern Hemisphere just is at the end of their winter. What do we learn from that about COVID and flu? Well, it turns out that in the Southern Hemisphere for their winter, our summer, there was very, very little flu. Why do you think that was?
Because they were wearing masks.
That is the theory, of course. That is the theory, that they were taking precautions that for COVID, and this helps against the flu as well. So one could say, oh, well, in the United States, then we won't have an issue with the flu because of the protections against COVID. Well, I don't know if you all have noticed, but the protective measures have not been evenly encouraged throughout the country. So there's huge gaps in our practices. So we can't count on that. But that's another reason why we don't know much yet about how the two infections together, how they would affect an individual. And I, for one, don't want to find out personally. Also, though, because of the very low flu in the Southern Hemisphere, that has made it a little more challenging than most years to figure out what virus strains we need to protect against in the vaccine. And that is my, not quite, but almost my segue to Ken. I just want to mention one more thing, and that is that there is a flu shot clinic, joint one with Ebenezer, at Ebenezer, September 27th. Dave is already signed up, if you don't mind my saying. Thank you. We're encouraging appointments simply so that we can space people better, but we will accept walk-ins. But wherever you get it, get your flu shot, and thank you. Take it away, Ken.
Okay. Find the okay. Well, just one comment. Hopefully all of you can see the slide for race for COVID-19 vaccine.
Yep.
Okay. Trying to get this thing to work though. There we go. Just one comment on Marcia's great presentation. Thank you, Marcia. That was really wonderful. I mean, I really think, if you think about this, both of these infections, the COVID and the flu, largely respiratory in a lot of ways. If you get a double whammy on that could be very bad for our health, I think. So it's really important to get the flu shot, because that's all we have there to help protect us. I'm going to talk about the development of the vaccines and what's going on in that. But of course, as we all know, we don't have a vaccine, and we won't have it for a while yet, despite comments that it'll be out by October by some people. So what I thought I should go over, what people are talking about in terms of a testing process, because these are the sort of tests that not just the vaccine, but every drug goes through.
Right.
And you have a set of preclinical testing. You first try it on cultured cells. Then you might try it in animals, such as mice or monkeys, and see if it protects, if the vaccine produces an immune response in the animal, because that would give you some idea of what's going on. That's followed by phase 1. I'm sure you've all heard phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and all that. Phase 1 is a safety trial. Small number of people, basically they get the vaccine. You want to make sure that they don't get deathly ill due to the vaccine you gave them, right? Before you put on a larger number. Phase 2 is a more expanded trial. You want to get maybe a couple of hundred people. You want to have a couple of different groups, different types. And this is still a problem even with the phase 3 that we're doing right now on some of these. You need to have a wide variety of people. So you want people from different races. You obviously want different genders. You want different ages, all of that. So you have some idea about what's going to happen when you go out to the general populace. In a phase 2, you're looking again for safety and for the ability to stimulate the immune response in the immune system. Phase 3 is the big one, and that's all the ones I'm going to talk about tonight are currently in phase 3 trials, and those are getting close. These are much larger scales. All of these trials are 30 to 40,000 people in each trial. The person is given a shot. They do not know if it's the vaccine or a placebo. The person giving them the shot doesn't know if it's a vaccine or a placebo. In addition, their coded goes back to that, and that's called a double-blind study, and that's what hopefully is being done on all of these. Stuff I read, I guess just as an aside, let me say that a lot of the sources that I would have expected to be very, very good on this topic weren't terribly good, and that includes some of the NIH stuff. Not that it was inaccurate or anything, it just wasn't very well presented, and it was sort of like they rushed it out, okay? A lot of the information on this has come out in news conferences and press releases and that type of stuff. And so you end up looking at the newspaper. So most of what I'm telling you tonight actually is stuff I learned by reading the New York Times. Okay, so that's where we're going with this. And that seemed to be the most reliable. Tribune had some good stuff too, so I won't knock the Tribune there. So what are these trials then? This is going to enable us, this phase 3 is going to enable us to figure out, does the vaccine really work? That is, in the ones who got the vaccine, were there many fewer people who got the disease than in the ones for the people who got the placebo? The FDA said in June that that it would approve any coronavirus or coronavirus vaccine that would be able to protect at least 50% of the vaccinated people. That's a fairly low bar, but we're desperate for a vaccine, and anything's, any port of call in a storm type of thing. Hopefully, usually the flu vaccine is, anywhere from 70 to 90% usually. Right. So, hopefully we'll do much better than that. Also, as you perhaps know already, with these larger phase 3 trials, you'll get more rare side effects. And one of the trials, the AstraZeneca trial, and I'll say a little more about that later, was stopped for a while. It's been restarted, at least in Britain. I'm not sure if it's been restarted in the US yet. And that was due to one very rare type of disease that one of the people got. And it wasn't clear because this thing only happens, I think there were 1,300 cases of that particular problem last year in the United States. So it's a pretty rare thing already. And it could well be that it just happened, and that was, their view of that. The other thing you should know is you can get early or limited approval, and this is what a lot of people are worried about, that we might rush this thing out so fast that it hasn't really been tested well enough, and we'll talk a little more about that as we go through this. China and Russia are doing this. China and Russia have approved vaccines without waiting to get the results of phase 3 trials. Most US experts just look at that and say, this is not a good idea at all. The most amazing thing in all of that was, according to Vladimir Putin, his daughter was actually one of the people who got the vaccine in Russia already. Once it's licensed, once it's out there, people are going to continue to monitor this. They're going to continue to try to find, make sure that everything is going well. The other thing you can think about is sometimes there are combined phases. And so there, some people do phase 1 and phase 2 together, or phase 2 and phase 3 together, that type of thing. And that's okay generally. That's not usually a problem, and it does help speed things up. You should realize, and you're probably aware of this from, again, the news reports and everything, that this is being speeded up a huge amount. The fastest we have ever developed a vaccine was mumps. And the mumps vaccine, that took 4 years. This is, where are we at? Half a year at the moment, I guess, something like that. People would like it out in less than a year. I'm not sure that's going to happen. Because of this push to get it out faster than what would normally happen without maybe skipping some of the tests and everything, the CEOs of the 9 major companies involved put out a pledge saying that they would uphold the integrity of the scientific process, that they wouldn't start shipping the stuff and making it available until they had satisfactory phase 3 trials and that the FDA had fully approved it. So we have hopefully their assurance that this is going to be okay. Okay, well, let's take a look at some basics here. This is a 2-part slide out of from Nature magazine, and just to show you a little bit about how this coronavirus works. It enters the body. You've probably seen pictures of the coronavirus with all these little spike proteins on the outside. It looks like a sphere with a bunch of golf tees stuck in it, right? And what they're doing, what those spikes on the outside are doing, is they bind to something called the ACE2 receptor. Now, ACE stands for angiotensin converting enzyme, which is a lot of words that you probably don't need to know, other than this is an essential protein on the outsides of a lot of our cells, particularly in high concentration in the lung, okay, which is pulling this right into the lung tissue. So that spike protein then binds to the ACE2 receptor, and the consequence of that is that the whole virus will get pulled into the cell in a process we call endocytosis. It essentially buds off a piece of the cell membrane on the inside, and that's what you see here, point number 2 here. and then the viral particle breaks down and extrudes its genetic material, which in this case is an RNA molecule, ribonucleic acid, as opposed to a deoxyribonucleic, which is what we have. But a viral RNA can be translated directly into protein. So it has the code when it goes into the cell to make the proteins that it needs for its life cycle. And it also codes for a protein which makes more of its RNA. And those then are combined, and it steals some, lipids and things and makes for cell membrane type or viral membrane in this case, and fuses with the cell membrane and spits the virus particle back out. So that's sort of the life cycle. But of course, what happens is this happens many, many, many times. And it essentially steals resources, and that's why you end up being sick, because you're not getting everything that you should be getting. And you have damage to the cells, et cetera. So there's a lot of things going on there. What we do then, as we come out, this can be ingested by a antigen presenting cell, or APC, which then activates a T helper cell. And the T helper cell activates two types of cells. One's called a B cell, which makes antibodies. Okay? So the antibodies will combine with coronavirus that are present in the blood, or any place that can find them, get to them. And bind to them and tag it for destruction. Okay? And there's other cell types that will then destroy it. It also makes a cytotoxic T cell, which will come in and destroy infected cells. Okay, that gets rid of the virus. That's great. But what's even better is that the B cells and the T cells have long-range memory. That is to say that these cells, if they see the antigen, that is the viral particle or whatever you made the vaccine to, and a lot of them are made to the spike protein that's on the outside, that receptor protein. If it sees that again, it can make it that antibody again real quick, okay? And that's what gives you immunity. That lasts for at least months usually, sometimes longer, sometimes a lot longer. And so hopefully that's what happens here. There's a whole host of things that you can do to make the vaccine. And it really depends on what are you going to inject into the person that's going to generate these antibodies. Okay? And one way to do that is to put in a whole virus, put the whole virus particle in. Now, obviously, you don't put a live virus in, okay? Don't put an actual virus. You gotta put a virus that you've somehow killed. There's one Chinese company that's doing this. This type of thing has been, it's actually what's used for the flu and chicken pox and measles and mumps. So it's been pretty successful, but you do have to worry that, you got to make sure that you have really good quality control on the killing or the attenuation of the virus so that it doesn't infect. The other thing I should note is that these viruses, vaccines, are typically then made in chicken eggs, and I believe there are some folks in the congregation, and Marcia, you would maybe know more about this too, but you might be on the lookout for this. There might be some folks who have egg allergies, and that can be a problem for them. So this is being developed by one of the Chinese companies. Probably won't be. Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me. Regarding the flu vaccine, they are using also, I forget the name of the procedure, but vaccines that are made without eggs. They're
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that
they do have those, because the egg allergy is not that uncommon.
Right.
Yeah, so
I mean, it's not real
available.
common, but it's not that uncommon either. So
Yeah.
they do have alternatives.
Yeah, and I think that's true of other vaccines too,
Yeah.
as well as the flu vaccine.
Yeah, and I'm sure if this were to turn out to be the way to do it, okay, and this is a very traditional way of making these vaccines, as you can see by the number that are use that method. If this turns out to be the way to do it, I'm sure that people will get around that problem because we have a lot of experience in how to do that, I think. The more interesting from a scientific point of view, at least, are the genetic vaccines. The genetic vaccines, you're putting either a piece of RNA. Now, this is not this is a piece that codes for, say, that's just the spike protein, not the whole virus. So there's no way that you're going to get COVID from getting either the RNA or DNA vaccines. Okay? They incorporate themselves into the cells. They get picked up, incorporated into the cells. They make a small amount of the protein that they code for. This is true of the RNA or the DNA virus. And that then presents to the antibody producing machinery I talked about in previous slides, and you get antibodies made, okay, to that protein, and that's enough to stop that. Here, the DNA viruses have been used for a couple of different veterinary cases. As far as I know, there's nothing that's ever been approved for use in humans. Interestingly, I note that one of the ones that they have approved it for is the West Nile virus, which is still causing some problems. But there are trials going on to use a DNA virus for the flu. It would be a different sort of virus and maybe be better in some ways, or for Zika, the Zika virus. What's nice about the mRNA and the DNA virus concept is that we can make that really quickly. In other words, and you'll see some protein-based vaccines in a few seconds. The protein-based ones, you have to purify the protein. You got to go through all sorts of trials, make sure that's really pure, and then you give it and you get the antibodies back, you hope, etc. Takes a lot longer to do that. We can synthesize the RNA and the DNA. So we can chemically make them. And you're talking about once you sequence the viral genome, as you get the genetic material from the virus, you know the order of the bases in that, then you can make that thing in a day. I mean, you know, it's literally that quick. So this is important in terms of future viruses, because coronavirus will not be the last nasty thing we ever see as a species. And if we can come up with a method of doing this much faster, then that could be a really good thing. Still have to go through all the tests to make sure it actually works, of course. The RNA viruses, this is what Moderna and Pfizer, Pfizer's in combination with BioNTech. It's a German company. This is what they're doing, and is basically they're getting a way to basically deliver RNA to the cell. They take a smaller piece of RNA that codes just for the spike protein. You get an immune response to that. That's enough to block the virus. This works in animals and seems to be working in early phase 2 studies. They're now in phase 3 and hopefully continuing. Another way that we've done viruses, I should say vaccines for viruses, is to take part of that code, the DNA or RNA, and bury it in another virus that we know is safe to give humans. There are some, you know, that are basically attenuated viruses or viruses that aren't kind of thing. The primary one used is called adenovirus. And that's what this little picture up here in the corner is supposed to be. And you can see the mRNA in there. And it infects the cells. It unloads the gene. The adenovirus itself is missing its own genes so that it's not going to do anything bad to you. And the RNA that it delivers can hopefully really produce the spike protein again and then make the antibody. Again, there's a number of these things. We vaccinate animals against rabies with this type of a system. Johnson & Johnson's actually finally making some real progress on an HIV vaccine, which would be really nice. Another problem to have. And Ebola vaccine also was an adenovirus or is an adenovirus that they're developing. And this seems to work. So Johnson & Johnson is the main one here. Oxford is also, University of Oxford is also, and CanSino is another Chinese company. And they've developed a vaccine with this too. There's a couple of other possible things. You can take not even the whole protein, but a piece of the protein and put that in. And some people attach these to sort of virus-like particles. It's not a virus, so you can't get the disease. And again, the main thing you want is to make sure it's safe. And so the HPV virus that we're pushing for a number of things now, that vaccine for that works off of that type of particle. And finally, recombinant vaccines. These are yeast and other cells can be engineered to carry the virus gene and just to make the protein. Okay? So you get the gene for the spike protein, you get it into a yeast cell, and you turn it into a little manufacturing routine for you and make more of the spike protein and then use that as your antigen to elicit the antibody. And this is how both shingles and hepatitis B vaccines are being done. So at the moment, in the pre-trial thing, and this is about, this data as far as I know is about a week old. So that means it's changed, okay? But there's at least 93 vaccines that are currently under animal trials. There's another 25 that are in phase 1, another 14 that are in phase 2, and 9 that are in fairly large phase 3 efficacy trials. 3 have limited or early usage certificates, and those are done in China and Russia. Those are countries that have gone that way. For us, there are no approved vaccines at this point. In terms of these phase 3 trials, the genetic trials, the Moderna NIH one, you're going to see a lot of controversy over this because the government has bankrolled Moderna to the point of now $2.5 billion. Okay, billion with a B, folks. and that represents a response to the seriousness of the disease. They're using this mRNA, which is a technology which I mentioned before, would be really neat because we can chemically synthesize the mRNA. Once we know the genome, we can do that type of thing. So developing that part, that's the reason they're ahead of the people who are using protein antigens. This technique though has never, I mean, it's brand new. Nobody's ever done it and gotten a vaccine with it all the way to market. Okay? In that government's investment, it was a $1 billion up front just because it was a neat idea and they decided, let's go try it. They've also been promised another $1.5 billion for 100 million doses to be used here in the US. We are going to see, and I'm not going to talk about this tonight, but you're going to see two issues here that are going to be in the news all the time. One is a lot of these companies have been paid by the government. And so basically the government has put in all the money needed to develop it, okay? And yet the companies will make the profit from it, okay? That was on, if you watched tonight's NewsHour, PBS NewsHour, that was one of the lead stories. The other thing that you're gonna see is, I'll speak briefly about that, is that other countries are really worried that the US is going to buy up, US and other rich countries are going to buy up all the vaccines and the poorer countries are just going to be left to die. And that's going to be a nasty thing to talk about too, okay? So these are issues that we're going to see a lot, I think. Okay, so so far so good with this. It protected monkeys. It's been through phase 1 and phase 2. It's in phase 3. No adverse effects so far. Different one from Pfizer BioNTech and also a Chinese company, Fosun. Again, sort of thing. They're doing a combined trial on 30,000 volunteers in the US, Argentina, Brazil, and Germany at the moment. And they claim they'll know by October, so just about the time of the election, okay, probably. They may know whether or not it will work. That doesn't mean they're going to be able to deliver the 1.3 billion doses that they're eventually going to need to deliver. They say that will take till the end of 2021, okay? And that's still pushing it, you know, but there's hope, at least. Okay. There's a viral vector vaccine where they used a adenovirus with the RNA in it. This was a Chinese company. It's basically the Chinese military, in fact. And they did phase 1, was fine. Phase 2 seemed to be fine. It gave a strong immune response. They then decided that they were going to go ahead and give it this special needed drug classification, and I believe they are injecting a large chunk of the military over there. So I don't know how much. That's the sort of information you can never find out. Phase 3 trials are just underway in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. There's a Russian group, and this is the Sputnik 5 that Putin renamed it. It was originally called GAM COVID Vac, but that wasn't a sexy name, so I went to Sputnik 5. And it's got a couple of adenoviruses, and they've been engineered to contain a coronavirus a gene. So they infect cells. The cells then produce the coronavirus protein, and the immune system develops an antibody to that protein. They went from small studies, and sort of a combined 1-2 phase 1-2 trial. And the one study I saw was only like 38 people. I mean, really small studies. And it did yield antibodies. It had mild side effects. What exactly that is, I'm not 100% sure what they noticed. They're now doing 2,000 volunteers. That's still way too small for a phase 3 trial. It needs to be expanded to about 40,000. This again, though, they're planning to they're starting to produce it, and they're planning to start giving it out more. This is the AstraZeneca University of Oxford vaccine. It is also an adenovirus that comes from chimpanzees. Again, same sort of thing. You put the gene in the adenovirus, you let the adenovirus infect cells, it produces the spike protein. The spike protein causes the antibodies to be raised against it. They had to stop the trial on September 8th because one volunteer developed a transverse myelitis. It's a very uncommon inflammation. I know that they've restarted the trial in Britain, but I don't know if they've restarted it here in the US. There's also some protein-based vaccines out there. This is where you actually inject just the protein. One Chinese one is in phase 2 trials on that with a combination of viral proteins. Notice the phase 2, so they're way behind these other ones. Well, that's because it took a long time to get enough material to even do the tests, because you have to grow up all these bacteria and cells, or not bacteria, but viruses and cells, make a lot of the protein, then you have to isolate the protein. It's very laborious. This is why previous vaccines have always taken so long to develop. Okay? So they've got one in China. There's Novavax is making, and they have a kind of an unusual thing where they make a nanoparticle and stick the proteins to it, and that they say elicits a better response. But they still have to purify the proteins to do that and everything. And so they're on phase 2 in Africa, South Africa. They hope to be started in phase 3 by October. And another Chinese company did a phase 1/2 on 743 folks. You know, and what do you learn from that? Well, you do learn they had an immune response, and in that small sample, nobody got into severe health problems due to it. They're in phase 3 now in Brazil and Indonesia. And this again this is the third one. The other Chinese one and the Russian one and now this Chinese one have been approved for emergency use in their countries, but not here. Yet another Chinese, this is from Wuhan, okay, Wuhan. Wuhan, of course, is where this all started. They've got a attenuated coronavirus one. So hopefully they can do the right sort of controls on that. Phase 3 trials in the United Arab Emirates, 5,000 people received it, another 5,000 receiving a different one from Beijing. I don't think we have results on that trial yet, at least that I could find. And finally, and this I saw, and I thought, this is really weird. This shows how desperate folks are, folks. I think it's because I don't see how this works particularly. But Murdoch Children's Research Institute in Australia took a vaccine that was developed for bacteria. Okay? Anything to do with this virus, and it protects against tuberculosis, tuberculosis. And they're conducting phase 3 trials to see if the vaccine protects against coronavirus. This is, I don't know why they would think this would work. If it does work, I'll be kind of surprised, happy, but kind of surprised.
It hardly works against tuberculosis either. It's
that's right.
not used anymore.
Yeah. So I don't know. It was, yeah, you're right. It was developed ages ago, this
Yeah.
particular thing.
It sounds like this one is almost on a level with injecting bleach.
Yeah. I mean, it's just sort of like, let's take everything off the shelf and try it, you know?
Yeah.
which is, you know, a tried and true way of drug development. But
Well, they did it for malaria and yellow fever, and
Mhm.
some of them even worked, but this one sounds just too weird.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. Okay, so a couple of things to warn you about. Normally, only about 10% of vaccine trials are actually successful. Well, we got 9 in phase 3 at the moment, so maybe we get 1. That's all we really need, but it's got to be a good one in that case. We got a lot of new alliances and global things and everything, which is great. But even if there's something successful, the immediate shortfall is going to be clear. I mean, in other words, it's going to be a while before we can cover the general population. Okay? And in terms of whether you should be wearing masks and washing your hands and social distancing and all of that, you can't really get that, you know, start to back off that at all until you're up around 60 plus maybe 70% of the population, depending on how effective the vaccine is. The vaccine isn't very effective. It's only 50% effective, like the FDA said it would approve if it got that. Then we effectively have to be 100%, and it may still not be enough. But, you know, when asked, AstraZeneca said, well, each organization or country will have to determine who gets immunized first and how it does that. You know, so it's not, the companies aren't saying, well, this is how you should do it. They're leaving that up to the politicians, basically. A lot of the governments, and the US has been the primary one here, are trying to secure large chunks of vaccine for their population. Which for us is a good thing, may not be for other countries. We'll see. So they're trying to get 300 million doses by January. Notice that most of these, however, are a double shot vaccines, they're thinking. So I didn't say that before, but most of these vaccines, it's like the shingles virus, right. I believe now is 2 shots.
Yeah.
And so you'll have to come back in a month and get your second shot, or it probably isn't going to be very effective. Okay, so we have a lot of compliance issues. We're going to have a lot of just encouraging people. We got a lot of anti-vaxxers. We got a lot of people, because of all the political nonsense that's gone on with this virus development, are going to be leery of taking it. For other first world countries, we're not alone in doing this. Other first world countries are doing this too. Doctors Without Borders is saying this is a real general dangerous trend of vaccine nationalism by richer nations, is the way they put it. The other thing is the World Health Organization has basically get my thing out of the way here. Said the challenge will be to ensure equitable access. All countries have access, not just those who can pay more. And so, as a result of that, they have started an pandemic response group and a vaccine alliance of governments. And so at least 80 richer nations and economies have signed up to help with this. It's known as COVAX. And they're raising $2 billion by the end of this year to help buy and distribute to poorer countries. Note that the United States is not part of this, and that we're trying to leave the WHO at this point. What this will do still, though, is not really enough. You know, the countries have signed up. They're going to receive enough doses for 3% of their population as quickly as possible, that would be basically enough to cover health and social care workers. Yeah, that'd be about it. As more vaccine is produced, the allocation is going to go to 20% of the population. That would be to people over the age of 65 and people with pre-existing conditions that make them vulnerable. Yeah. Which is probably all of us here in this group. And finally, after everybody has received 20%, then the vaccine would be distributed according to other criteria such as country vulnerability and immediate threat of COVID-19. What are you going to require? You're going to require 60 to 70% to get herd immunity. That's a lot of vaccine when you're talking about something that's a pandemic. Yeah, it's going to take a while to do that. And in the meantime, we had better keep using our masks and washing our hands and social distancing. When do you want to get vaccinated? Okay, well, clearly you want a vaccine that's gone through phase 3 trials successfully. Okay. And, you know, if there's several that have been successful, obviously you probably want to go with the one that has the best prevention rate, the best effectiveness. The FDA said it would approve anything with over 50% effectiveness, but hopefully we'll do better than that. And the other thing I should point out that if you time this from the end of the injections of the phase 3 trial, okay? So when they're done administering things for the phase 3 trial, if you then wait 6 weeks, I think that's what we got that. I don't know if you see that or not. 6 weeks, you should see effectively all the adverse effects that might be there. And this is based on the idea that previous vaccines, almost every single adverse effect has shown up in the first 6 weeks after injections. There may be something that you know shows up 2 years from now or something like that, but hopefully not. Okay, that is all I got. Questions, folks?
I have a comment I wanted to make, that another problem with all of this is that we have no idea how long any vaccines will be effective for.
Yeah, that's correct.
So if it's only effective for 3 months, it's not really useful. But
That's
if
right.
we have to get it,
You know, we'd be different if we only had to vaccinate 1 million people or something, but with the numbers we have to vaccinate, if it's only good for 3 months, I mean, even if it was good for a year, it's problematic, but I think people would still go with it.
yeah, well, and eventually we'd catch up if it were once a year, but more often than that, it's going to be like impossible. And we won't know that for quite a while, because obviously you got to wait the time to see how long the antibodies last, or how long they're effective in protecting. Yeah.
Other questions or?
One question that came up when we were first learning about the virus is, does this virus have the ability to mutate or to adapt itself either to different forms of the body or different things that are thrown at it? And are any of the kinds of vaccines that you have looked at, can any of them deal with this? Can they handle a morphing virus?
Yeah. And of course, it depends on how much it mutates and where.
Yeah.
Now, most of these viruses are directed towards the spike protein. The spike protein tends to I mean, you've seen the pictures. It sits there and it pokes out well away. You know, so there's a good chance, and this is just a supposition on my part, but there's a good chance that things will be, that it won't be able to have mutations that are so hidden. Now, the question is whether or not it gets a mutation that destroys the binding of the antibody that our body has made. That can happen. And, you know, that in that case, you end up having to go through the process again.
Yeah.
They haven't seen a lot of mutations in this, but
Right.
they have seen some. And the one case that I know of where there's a person has been reinfected, this was over in Hong Kong.
Right.
And the person was reinfected. That reinfection was with a different strain.
Yep.
Yeah. So, so it's certainly possible. Yeah.
But it's definitely nothing like the flu virus.
It's nothing like the flu virus in terms of mutation ability. Yeah.
Right.
Or the common cold virus for that matter. Which the common cold virus is really kind of a nasty because it in one sense, luckily it's not that bad to us in terms of health, but a lot of the mutations occur literally in a chunk of the virus that is so far buried that the antibodies can't get in to react with it. So it gets new versions, and
hence we don't have a vaccine for that.
And hence we don't have a vaccine for that. That's right. I got to tell you that 1972, okay, this is, you guys will appreciate this. 1972, I moved from Duke to Purdue, and I joined a group that was doing crystallography on the common cold virus. And, you know, I didn't work on that project. I worked on a different one, but everybody in the lab, they had a specific strain of the common cold, you know, so there were no mutations or anything. But everybody in the lab came down with a cold the first week or so that they were in the lab working. I mean, there was just no way around it. And so you would eventually get over that. And you did develop antibodies in that case for that particular one. So.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
but this computer is saying that I've been signed out because there's another device signing in. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, but if it's okay with you, I am going to stop the recording.
Okay.
We can still talk until we're cut off. But thank you, one and all.
Thank you.
To and all those who are listening later for
Bye, Susan.
joining in on this. And here ends the